Okay, and then we move on to Brian Dunbar. I saw your post on A Moment of Service regarding questions for Dave Sim about the Service comic book in your upcoming phone call. I had a question with regards to the old standby, why an aardvark? Although what I mean in asking this isn't what most people probably do when they ask the same question. I know that early in his career, Sim was inspired by Howard the Duck, and that Service was originally a mascot for his then wife's fanzine. What I'm interested in is why an aardvark in universe? It's established in Service that aardvarks aren't actually anthropomorphic animals in the sense Howard the Duck or Rocket Raccoon are. Rather, they're born to normal humans and are more akin to deformed people than talking animals. I'll just interrupt momentarily at that point to say that wouldn't be the perspective from the aardvark side of the equation, which would be, I would infer that the aardvarks are the normal beings and human beings are deformed aardvarks. So hence aardvarks being able to breed with humans. No one looking at Service funny for his relationships with Jaka or Red Sophia, and Service being disgusted by his son's eventual experiment crossing humans with animals. Very good triangulation there. Yes, what are we talking about here, and what are the presuppositions, and what are the genetic predispositions of the life forms that we're discussing? And we have to leave it, I think, as philosophically open as that in order to cover all of the properties. And then Brian gets even more down to the nitty-gritty. The reason aardvarks are born is to bring balance, as among their various magical properties, attracting magic, occasional mutations like Cerebus sneezing fire, or the Cerebus face in Siren's armpit, things tend to fall into perfect order around them. This is known as the magnifier ability in the series. And I'm going to interrupt there as well to say, magical is, I think, in the context of what Brian is talking about, and he is talking at a very elevated metaphysical level when he's talking about this. I would suggest that magical is a pejorative sense. It could be magical, or it could be otherworldly, or it could be divinely inspired, which I would suggest is a hierarchy. But then that's my hierarchy because I am a monotheist. Okay. Which then, the reason I interrupted there is because then he says, what I'm curious about is who or what created the aardvarks and for what purpose. In that case, if you're asking a monotheist, everything comes out from God, unless it's from God's adversary. So that would be the question of, I created the aardvarks. I mean, I created Cerebus and Siren and Suendius Poe. For what purpose? And that would depend on whether you were talking about pre-monotheistic Dave Sim or post-monotheistic Dave Sim. Early in the series, we're to assume Terra, or perhaps Terum with an E, if you happen to be a Sirenist. See, now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of it. Created them for some unknown reason. But by the end of the series, we learn that the Judeo-Christian Islamic God light void hypothesis holds true, whether it's in relationship to God and YHWH or Terem and Terem. Yeah, that definitely gets down to the nitty-gritty of, if you asked Suetius Poe, he would have one answer about who created the aardvark. Siren would have another interpretation of who created the aardvark, and Cerberus had a different interpretation of who created the aardvark, and then a different interpretation after he became a monotheist through his exposure to Rick. If that is indeed the case, my guess would be that God created aardvarks to be a special kind of prophet, and that it was Cerberus's destiny to convert to Judaism, bring down the false Terem and Terem religion, and finally interpret the Bible in the correct way. Cerberus brought light, male light, you may say, to the distinction between God and YHWH, while also giving an accurate religious interpretation of the Big Bang. Perhaps Siren and Suetius Poe rejected their true calling, and Cerberus was the only one to actually do what God made him to do. Perhaps God had some other purpose in mind for them, but they rejected it to play chess or run a fascist police state, respectively. Yes, I mean, to me, these are all Judgment Day questions. I think I've documented as accurately as possible what the structure is of God versus YHWH. I'm either the only one that believes that, or I'm the only one that believes that as thoroughly as I do. So that becomes a question of, well, there's a bunch of questions in there. I mean, one of the questions is, are women essentially fascistic? I mean, Siren is the female aardvark and is definitely the biggest fascist in the book. Are women essentially fascist by nature? And certainly that's been my experience. Feminists, which is not including all women, but feminists are definitely fascistic by nature. I mean, it's the beehive. You conform to the beehive, or you're destroyed, or you're eradicated. There's only inside the beehive and outside the beehive. But I want to go back to the beginning of Brian's paragraph, where he said, my guess would be that God created aardvark to be a special kind of prophet. It's interesting when you get into the question of prophethood, which we all associate with God and his prophet. But I think it's noteworthy that in the book of Genesis, which spans a good 2,000 years of this epoch's monotheistic history, from in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, through to Joseph bringing his entire family down to Egypt, which is a good chunk of history. The term prophet is only used once, and that's when Ahimelech, being faked out by Abraham, saying that Sarah is his sister, not his wife, essentially wants Sarah for his wife, and actually prays to the YHWH that's the first time that God calls anyone